My friends, I have acquired none other than the Nintendo Switch 2. However, despite owning it for roughly a week now, I have not played even 1 second of Mario Kart World. Instead, today I would like to continue our series of exploring comfy places on the Nintendo 64. And the Nintendo Switch Online service allows us to adventure to many Nintendo 64 video games, which, what better use than to explore some of the comfiest places in these wonderful games that we played in our childhood 5 generations of video game consoles ago. And now you may see where I am running in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and it is to a place that I've seen many people bring up in my last 2 videos as a particularly comfy or interesting place. And it's going to be none other than this sort of silo tower structure in the back end of Lon Lon Ranch. Lon Lon Ranch is really an amazingly wonderful place, kind of a magical place. Any place in these games where there's no enemies and you can't really get hurt is a cool place. And especially places where time does not pass you by is another cool place. Here we are on the ranch. If I can find the sun somewhere, it doesn't move. It's not moving as through the sky as it would be in Hyrule Field or some other locations in the game. And so it just kind of feels like you can finally relax and stay here forever, exploring and just taking in a beautiful blue sky and some fresh air, I suppose, at least in video game form. Now, this building in particular, I guess one would call it an outbuilding, and no name of the building is given as we enter, but it's just some kind of tall silo. There's one window in here, there's a few cows, and the entire point of this room is to solve this, very easy puzzle, which then you crawl through this cracking at a heart piece. I'm sure that, it's been almost 30 years, I hate to say it. I'm sure many of us have done such a thing. It's one of those crazy things, though, where I think Ocarina of Time sold, I want to say, like 7 or 8 million copies. And you compare it to what, Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom have sold, and it's very small order, Now, the heart piece is here. It's one of the game's, many heart pieces. I think there's 40, if memory serves me right. Maybe 36. But you get one heart piece here. You're in this sort of strange room, which reminds me of like Skulltula rooms or Deku Tree rooms. You kind of explored successfully into this cubby. There's some hay. In the real world, such a room might be sort of like a rat's nest or something like that. A mouse or rat might be living in there. But in this game, it's a cool spot where you get rewarded with a heart piece for adventuring around. And there's sort of this beautiful balance in Ocarina of Time. I prefer calling it Ocarina of Time, just what I always have through my days. Of like, there's a lot to explore, but not too much. And I think it sort of finds this fine balance between a game like Breath of the Wild, where there's almost too much to explore, or, perhaps even Donkey Kong 64, where there's like too much to collect. So that's on one end of the spectrum. And then, the other end is a game like Twilight Princess that just always kind of feels empty and like there's not enough going on. But this game, Ocarina of Time, it's literally one of the best games ever, widely considered that way. And I find there's like just enough. It's in the Goldilocks zone of things to do. And this kind of room, look, we got some milk crates, we got some farm tools, which are cool, a shovel or spade, and another wooden, what is that one, that wooden one? I cannot really even tell. And then we have another shovel or actually a pitchfork, a conventional pitchfork here, what the townsfolk might use when they're enraged at King Ganondorf, perhaps. What do we have up there? A couple of urns, maybe, that we cannot access. You know, I'm playing on the Switch Online, so I can't, you know, use GameShark codes and hackery to levitate. But that might be a cool thing to do sometime. We can indeed jump on these things, which is cool. Barrels and so on. And really the only one more thing we can do, and let me check this file for bottles. So I'm out of bottles, but, you know, I'll just use some blue fire here. Now this actually, you know, it's one of these things that the game was hyper-realistic. Using blue fire here would be catastrophic. It would set the hay on fire. And, you know, be very, very bad. But anyways, it didn't do that. Literally the only thing else you can do is play Epona's song for the cows. And as we all know, Epona's song for the cows? Moo. What a nice song. It reminds me of the pasture. That song makes me feel so good I can produce a lot of milk. Have some of my refreshing and nutritious milk. And there we go. What a wonderful bottle of milk. Very nutritious. Use it with C to recover your life energy. And 2 drinks per bottle. 10 total hearts. Wow, we have this text telling us exactly how to use it. You know, it's kind of funny because I guess I remember all these other games, and especially Zelda's, and there's too much text coming up all the time, and it kind of annoys you, but those 3 sort of sections of text never really annoyed me too much here in this game, and perhaps it is simply the joys and comfort of such a wonderful location here in Ocarina of Time for none other than the one and only Nintendo 64. Here's perhaps an unexpected location, and it's not the whole Donkey Kong's Jungle Parkway as a whole. You know, it's kind of, you know, doesn't really fit the category of comfy places. I suppose it does. You know, watching Mario's steamboat go by is actually pretty cool. I do love it. You know, I always pondered what it'd be like to catch a ride on Mario's steamboat here on DKJP. For sure. I mean, look at it pulling a U-turn at the edge of a waterfall there. That's an unbelievable... The captain of this ship must be very good. An unbelievable maneuver. And yeah, I would consider this to be a riverboat and this sort of body of water to be a river. I mean, just... I did not mean to sit here and watch this go by, but, like, it's just compelling for some reason. Look at the little white puffs of smoke emanating from the 2 chimneys on the boat. You know, you imagine what it'd be like to go for an afternoon. If you've ever been on a nice boat for an afternoon day trip, you know, it's a fun time. A fun little time cruising around. But I actually meant to show a different place on this stage, which I find very serene and comfy. And it's none other than the bridge and waterfall here. You know, just look at that waterfall overflowing and some river into this undefined canyon. We never know or find out where the canyon goes. We're just here in DK's Jungle Parkway. And, you know, you can see from this angle, the U-turn that the riverboat was pulling is really quite an amazing maneuver. You know, we're in a Nintendo 64 video game, but nonetheless, you know, what a maneuver. It's very, just this spot is really cool. We can see the puffs of smoke barely from the chimneys of the riverboat. Does it render in here? I don't think it does really from this side. And I'm like, as close as it gets, you know. We just see the puffs of smoke probably. The full body of the ship. Yeah, it is not rendering in. Even we're in, you know, the Nintendo Switch 2. The most technically capable Nintendo that's ever been made. And still, the game does not process the boat being shown here. But that's okay, because the river flowing over into the waterfall, into this canyon, it's just a thing of beauty, you know? And I remember back in the day as a young lad exploring a lot, you know, looking for shortcuts and whatnot. And so I spent a lot of time on this bridge just mucking around, kind of figuring out what could be done, if anything. And, you know, there's a famous shortcut up here where you jump through the wall, and that's the insane shortcut on the stage. But I was always trying a shortcut where, like, I was wondering if you could get from this spot onto the bridge. If there was any way with boosts and stars and so on. And you cannot pull it off, as far as I know. I mean, I would love to see a tool-assisted run do it. But, like, if I shoot off, you know, you can't get enough clearance. And then, you know, as you get older and learn more about how these video games work, it's like, would the bridge even load if you could jump onto it from this side? And you can see, you know, I was actually pretty close there. Like, it actually got somewhat close to clearing the water. Like, you know, I'm not too far off, you know, with stars and with maybe bouncing off of a Bowser's head. Could such a thing be done? And maybe it could. But the whole of DK's Jungle Parkway is really a remarkable course. Even just the reverse, looking into the cave that one emerges from, it gives a very unusual perspective. But ultimately, I just love hanging on that bridge, and I tried for hours and hours when I was young, seeing if there was another shortcut, seeing what could be explored, what could be ventured, and nothing ever was, you know? But nonetheless, I certainly enjoyed the time I spent just looking right here at this beautiful waterfall. And it kind of makes me wonder, you know, could I do a whole video about, like, the most beautiful waterfalls on the Nintendo 64? This would certainly be very high up there. Hey, if you want to see that video, let me know, because, you know, I love just... Look, we're all getting older. I just love hanging out and looking at these games now. You know, talking about speedrunning and whatnot, you know, I still enjoy it. I'm going to still make those videos here and there. But those were almost always an excuse to just indulge in the nostalgia and indulge in these wonderful games of yore, you know, of our lives gone by, the days of our lives. You know, someone would achieve an amazing record in Mario Kart or GoldenEye, we could revel in the glory of this new record. But the reality is, I only wanted to do it really to indulge in the nostalgia. And you kind of realize you can maybe cut out the middleman of speedrunning, especially as things get more and more optimized and more difficult to have that excuse to explore these games, and just turn it on and take it in. And that's why we're here today. The beautiful waterfall of Donkey Kong's Jungle Parkway. Now, could this be a Comfy Places video without once again visiting Pilotwings 64, made by Nintendo and Paradigm Simulation? Probably not. So let's start the game, and you know, this time, just for the sake of it, I will use the character Goose. You know, he's he's a middleweight character. And today, let's explore the Everfrost Island, particularly this challenge where it is nighttime. And I guess the point of the challenge is you have to bounce that ball into that goal area, which is an interesting challenge. It takes some time and practice, but I'm going to check out a different area here on the one and only Everfrost Island. You know, I love the naming convention, Everfrost. I think there's an Everfrost in Diddy Kong Racing, Everfrost Valley. Now, I would love to check out some Diddy Kong Racing places in this series of Comfy Places. Unfortunately, the game is not on Nintendo Switch Online yet. It is believed that Conker, the character, is the one that perhaps Rare is holding hostage from Nintendo, preventing Conker's Bad Fur Day and preventing Diddy Kong Racing from being released. You know, they could remove or replace Conker probably pretty easily, but hey, who knows? But here, my friends, is a comfy place on Everfrost Island. So it's like a full-on, you know, Swiss Alp-style village with that sort of architecture of these buildings. And it's nighttime, so we have the lights on in the buildings, giving it a very, you know, Thomas Kinkadian feel. in terms of the lighting. And we have all sorts of interesting, aspects of architecture. Like, this is like some sort of courtyard. What's going on here? Two garage doors in an outdoor courtyard. Very kind of medieval villagey. And it's sort of hard to tell if they're going for a blend of medieval and alpine, because there is some industry going on the island and some other technologically advanced things, as we'll see. Here again we have sort of a lighthouse, though it is unfortunately not on, and an oceanic break wall, a sea wall, to sort of give a little harbor for the village, which is pretty cool. But, here we can see a big parking lot. You'd go park and walk the shoreline, I suppose, or that's where the parking is if visiting this wonderful village on, say, a day pass. There's the chimney emanating smoke, which is always cool. Let's see if I can land like on the balcony of this building on the second floor. You could sneak in with the rocket belt for perhaps an evening tryst, if one were so inclined, with the damsel staying on the third floor. But that's what you imagine when playing these games, and that's what I find so wonderful. You're just, we all have different games we love, but a lot of the new age stuff, it just feels almost overwhelming. There's so many details everywhere. And don't get me wrong, I do want to play Mario Kart World and explore it at some point, but it just almost feels overwhelming with so much going on. Whereas the details are like just right on the N64 to appreciate in a certain way. Here's a landing strip. It's used in one of the missions on this course. And so we have an air traffic control tower. We have, a satellite antenna tower even. And up here we actually have very clearly the ski lodge. This is more directly the ski resort with a parking lot, a couple buildings. You'd come in here, you'd put on your ski gear, and we can see the ski gifts, the ski lifts, my friend, are active, going up and down the mountain. And wouldn't that be a fun time? Taking the ski lift up to the top. It's still running at this hour. Perhaps it's not even that late. In the winter, the sun sets at like 5 p.m. So, maybe it's 5 or 6 p.m. We're on top of the ski lift having an evening session. And look, they even made this little building at the top of the ski lift, like you would have a little cafe. You could get a coffee or a hot chocolate and maybe a croissant or some other baked good before descending the slope on your ski run. And the fine details of this section, and this is really only a small section of Everfrost Island, are just so wonderful. They're so charming. Whether it's nighttime and they're well lit, or there's a version of the map where it's snowing. It's just so comfy. And again, we have this nice church over here. I believe it's a church. I mean, I know that Nintendo has some hard rules about imagery of religious imagery and whatnot. So there's no, cross or other religious insignia. But, it's probably a church. The bells are ringing there, and it's pretty cool. Almost looks like more advanced than a church. One might even call it a basilica or a cathedral, looking over the ocean. That's pretty cool. And it's a cool course. We have, an oil rig offshore. We have some other industry going on, and maybe we will perhaps explore that another time. Well, I've just come into Majora's Mask here, my save file. It's the second day in Clocktown. It is rainy. Is time passing normally? Let's do this. Oh, I guess it was passing slow, so there you go. But I know many people. I brought the laundry room in the laundry pool in a previous video. Many love the comfiness of this spot, especially on the rainy second day. And no doubt, That is an amazing spot. But I'm going to show another spot today. And, I mean, look, the entirety of Clocktown, in my opinion, is comfy. I know some others were commenting that, oh, the imposing moon makes it uncomfy, but it's a thunderstorm, you know, but you're kind of safe, and there's all these great spots. But few things beat right here. Grandma's room. You know, this is just, like, what a room. Imagine hanging out here and just, imagine this was your room. Like, what a great room. And, you know, we know old Grandma's gone a bit senile, but she's got just a great room here. The fire's roaring. She's sitting by the fire. She must be nice and warm. I mean, imagine taking that fire on a rainy day. How wonderful that would be. The bed's in the corner. You know, many people are opposed to bed in the corner. And, you know, I understand the pros and cons of such a thing, but I feel like it's max comfy. You know, you get snuggled right in the corner. And at various points we see, you know, Grandma's, I suppose, granddaughter, Anju, come in and tend to her, bring her food and whatnot. And they always have an interesting discussion. Let's read her book here for a second. We're going to take refuge at Romani Ranch tomorrow. I guess the moon really will fall. It's been her lifelong home, this inn. Fleeing is unbearable, but nothing can be done. Well, maybe if you're Link, you can save it. Save the world. I think I'll take several of Gampy's favorite books. So presumably some of these books are, you know, her late husband's. And one can only imagine what these books must be. You know, there's just something so comfy about a grandmother's presence. You know, there really, really is. And nothing beats it. You know, we all, look, if you're enjoying this nostalgia, then we all have those days in our youth where we were sick from school. Grandma was watching us. She brought us tea and buttered bread or toast, maybe ginger ale, and we watched The Price is Right, hosted by Bob Barker. No doubt about that. Our favorite minigame is Cliffhanger, is one of them, with, you know, the yodeling sound. What a rush that is, Cliffhanger. Showcase Showdown. And there's just something so, like, magical about those sorts of days that I hope many look upon fondly. See, I can't quite get on top of the dresser, but that's a, you know, a cool spot. Can I get on top of that chair? Maybe not. Oh, I totally can. Nice. Wow, we're on the chair, sitting with Granny. Oh, we're nice. Wow, we're right on top of the book. That's pretty sick. What a wonderful spot. And these are the sorts of things, you know, you would kind of just mess around. Your grandmother's watching you on one of those days, and you would be just messing around in the house, driving her nuts. But because she's a grandmother and she's seen it all, you know, she doesn't get too mad at you. You know, let me tell you, it's been about a couple years now, but, you know, I mean, look, we're millennials and older, and, you know, we're all getting into our 30s and 40s now, I'm sure. That's my YouTube stats. And so, you know, if any of us still have grandparents around, we consider ourselves lucky. It's been a few years now since I lost my last grandmother. And, you know, one of 5 of her grandchildren. And believe it or not, after, you know, a couple years after things have been settled, no one else wanted her fine china. None of the other grandchildren wanted her fine china. And I said, for goodness sake, it's my grandmother's china. I'm going to take it and save it and keep it. It's a Royal Albert Old Country Roses pattern, which is apparently one of the most famous, well-purchased, popular patterns of the time. And so now I have a mostly complete set of Royal Albert Old Country Roses china in my possession. And by goodness gracious, one day I will throw a grand tea party just for the sake of it, in her honor. You know, God love her. You know, what can you say? A life well lived. And these are the things to remember our grandparents by. Stories by the fire, days when we're ill, when they've taken care of us, and by goodness, tea parties in their honor. Oh, here's Anju at noon. I was wondering if she was going to come in and give Grandma some food there, but it appears not. She does go to the laundry pool on day 2, which is quite interesting, especially that we know her husband to be hangs out around there. She must have known something. She's quite sad. We cannot interact with her, and so she doesn't get food. I guess Grandma's going to go hungry. Which, you know, that is what it is, I suppose. Not that she eats Anju's cooking anyways. And of course, if we put on the all-night mask, we can actually listen to her story without falling asleep. Yes, let's hear a story. Grandma, let's just do the Carnival of Time. We got these lovely cutscenes. It's kind of interesting art. And it's pretty uncommon to get this art. It looks a lot different, and this is the only circumstance where we see it in the game. For ages, people have worn masks resembling the giants who are the gods of the 4 worlds. Now it has become a custom for each person to bring a handmade mask to the Carnival of Time. It is said that if a couple united on the day of the festival and dedicated a mask as a sign of their union, it would bring luck. This actually reminds me of a bunch of couples that got married on July 7, 2007, so 777, or even August 8, 2008. You know, 8 is a lucky number in some cultures, especially East Asian cultures. I think that's the day they had the opening ceremony of the Olympics as well in China, Beijing. So, interesting lore that they pull from in the game. The centerpiece of the carnival is the clock tower, and on the eve of all the festivities, the doors to its roof are opened. Now that makes me wonder about, is it common for the villagers to go up there? We never really see it. You know, you go up there to battle Skull Kid with Majora's Mask on the eve of the festivity. I guess most people have vacated by that point. But imagine a world where the village people are up, you know, on the clock tower. That'd be pretty cool. From atop the clock tower roof, a ceremony to call the gods is held, and an ancient song is sung. You know, we see with these hints through the game, which is quite cool. All of these festivities for the Carnival of Time are held so that we may ask the gods for a rich harvest in the year to come. Wow. What an interesting little story. We did a good job. That's all for Tortoise. Now, when does it open? Well, it opens on the eve of the festival. There you go. She's proud of you. And hey, isn't that all we can ask for? All a young lad needs is for his grandmother to be proud of him. But hey, thanks for coming along with me and looking at more comfy places on the Nintendo 64, on the Nintendo Switch 2. I mean, why else get a Nintendo Switch 2 if not for this? So, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what places you'd like me to check out next in the comments. A huge thanks for watching, and a thanks to the Patreon supporters over on Patreon. Stay true, my friends, and I will see you in the next stream, video, or fireside.